This month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored by Allison Cook and Super Inframan. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And a couple of weeks ago, we did a show on, or 2 weeks ago, I think it was, we did a show on Ancient Aliens with the Snake Brothers, and we said, we got to come back and do a part two. And so, hey, hi, Snake Brothers.
Hey, how's it going?
What's up? Glad to be here.
Time for part two.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I always love having you guys on.
And we love being on, so we appreciate it.
It's always fun to have a chat with the Seriah.
So, Ancient Aliens. Now, I should mention that when we did the show last time, I just kind of sprung that on you. there was no preparation on you guys' part for that. I was just like, hey, Ancient Aliens, and you went from there. And a few people had mentioned, you got this wrong, and that's part of the reason why, because there was absolutely no time for you to prepare. We got about this point on the show, and I said, let's talk about Ancient Aliens.
Right, and I mean, leading up to the show, you were like, so maybe we'll talk about this, maybe we'll talk about that, or maybe we'll just talk about something else. And so we didn't know what was going to happen.
Oddly enough, I think those shows go the best overall because they're kind of a free-form conversation.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. And after we were done, we were thinking, we were talking with each other about it. Like, man, we should have talked about this, and he asked about that, and we should have talked. So we were like, let's plan another one, and then we'll prepare for it. So we planned another one, and we're still not prepared. We are not prepared.
All right.
But no, I actually did do some prep today, and it was mainly one of the things I wanted to talk about. Was your questions about Mars. You brought up Mars multiple times and the face on Mars, and that was the
whole
thing.
Area of Cydonia.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to address, and I just had this thought about the face on Mars. You know, the first image that created all of the hype about the face was taken in I think it was 1976.
Something like that, from the Viking Explorer, right. I think.
I had the date written down here. So it was July 25th, 1976. And the thing that occurred to me after the last show was like, well, I remember looking at that image and thinking, holy crap, there's pyramids and there's a face on Mars. This is way back, and then finding out later that other pictures were taken at other times of day and it was just a trick of the light. And I thought, okay, nothing to see here. But now thinking about it with what we call these eyes, after looking into all these other ancient structures and stuff all over Earth and the way people build things, they built things on Earth purposefully to make tricks of the light at certain times of year. Like think of that. What's the name of the pyramid in Central America that has the
Chichen Itza? Is it where the serpent comes down?
Yeah.
Right. On the equinox or whatever, the light shines on the stairway, and there's a specific. It makes the pattern of a serpent that slowly moves down the pyramid.
Right.
And so
isn't that also the same temple that you can clap at the bottom, and at the top it makes the sound of the bird that is sacred to Quetzalcoatl?
I think so. Let me.
I think you're right.
Let me look. You guys keep talking.
So I was just like, well, that would be exactly the way if let's say we were talking about aliens coming from Mars, and let's just go full, way out there on this idea of aliens visiting Mars or building stuff on Mars and then coming here and influencing the builders here. So you can imagine that maybe there would be a structure on Mars that looked like something, played tricks with the light and shadow at certain times of year, and not others. So that image that was taken on July 25th, 1976 is actually 21 days from the summer solstice of Mars. which is on July 4th, 1976. So I thought that was cool. I just had the idea and I looked it up, and it's like, man, it's pretty close. Picture was taken very close to the summer solstice on Mars, and that's what gave the shadows and everything that really brought out the features of the face. Now, the other thing about it is that it is like it's like a mile, 1.2 miles long or something, which is
it's huge. Yeah, it's a very large feature.
So I don't know if it was constructed, but I would say most likely it was not constructed. It would be a natural feature, but that's again one of the things that we see here in the ancient world is that they utilized natural structures and edited them to make forms of art or things like that. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe it was a natural feature that was edited.
I mean, even when you look at the newer pictures of it, it's incredibly regular for a geological feature.
Yes.
Yeah. There are really good high resolution images now that they used, I think like 3D cameras and stuff to kind of give you the feel for the structure. And it's basically considered like a mesa.
Yeah, it looks like a mesa. But it has very straight lines. It's pretty regular for a mesa. It's very interesting. But so
it's also odd that there are pyramid-like structures right by it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And that whole area of Cydonia is around 40 degrees north latitude. And that's, Giza is 30 degrees. So it's if you imagine the position of it on the globe would be fairly close to some of the, it would, I guess, if it had life and stuff at one point, that would be a milder climate than going further and further north. Because another thing that Mars has is this, I can't remember what the term for it is, but its axis tilts. It has this, it tilts further and further, and then it comes back to city straight. But its nod is way more than Earth's nod. Like Earth's axis nods up and down too. But they basically, by calculating how far it goes, they think that it goes through regular ice ages as well, where the ice comes all the way down, and there's only like a band around, above and below the equator that's not covered in ice. And that probably, I haven't seen exact maps of what it would look like if it was covered in ice that far, but I bet you at 40 degrees north, it would not be in the ice. It would be in the ice-free zone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. So
that is interesting. Yeah. Okay. So it is Cococan at Chichen Itza. Is the one with the shadows. I can't find if that's the same one with the sound, but I think it is the same one. It is lends like that technology to do something like that, especially with the sound, is just astonishing to us. Yeah. That I mean, that's why they're, I think the standard explanation is that it was an accident or it's a coincidence, but because it's so hard to explain how that could have been done on purpose. I mean, the shadow itself is pretty, that's pretty, I mean, that's very impressive. And, but of course they can't say that was an accident. I mean, I guess some people could say it was a happy accident that happens, but but I think it's accepted that was done on purpose. But the sound, I don't know.
And if you told somebody today to replicate the sound thing, they'd put a speaker at the top, and when you clapped at the bottom, the speaker would make the sound of the bird. Like it wouldn't be the traveling of the sound that transforms. They would just use technology.
Right. I mean, how would you even? You do lots of work with sound. Can you imagine like how to sit down and think, how do I make this echo?
Especially without computers.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of things I think in the ancient world that would be ridiculously hard to do without computer modeling.
Yeah.
We talked to Chris Dunn and a couple of his colleagues about some of the discoveries they've found inside the King's Chamber. I think we talked about this on this show, maybe, where all of the blocks of stone, the granite stone inside the King's Chamber, are positioned so that they match the resonant frequency. If you were to be able to see the standing waves of sound echoing around the room, the nodal lines of the waves would match up where the joints in the stone were.
Huh.
And the actual, like the strongest point of the wave, the apex of the wave, is hitting right in the center of the stones in the walls. I mean, how do you do that without computer modeling?
Well, we talked last time, too, about the scientific studies they're doing on how, what was it, electromagnetic waves move through the pyramid?
Yeah, that's true. We did talk about that. And they modeled it with, with a floor and without a floor. Mm-hmm. And then I think the one with the floor in it, the highest energy area was like right where the king's chamber is. It's like, yeah. It's just baffling to imagine. Number one, that these could be coincidences, and then if they aren't, how did they do it without
like the oracle chamber in the Hypogeum too is another example. I mean, how did they do that? It's amazing. The Hypogeum is a very complex, large structure that's multiple levels deep, and there's this one chamber that if you go in there and you speak in there, then people throughout the complex can hear you. That's I mean, I guess you could do it, but it does seem like you would have to model it, right? You would need you'd need to plan it out somehow.
And then we talked about the possibility that, I mean, this is maybe out there, but if they didn't have computer modeling, but they were somehow able to sense these things or see these things with their mind
sense. Yeah.
Yes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Maybe they had another sense that allowed them to pick up on stuff that we don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they had some they had some ancient practice that they could practice. Maybe we could do it if we knew how to practice it. I don't know. I mean, you've talked to plenty of people about telekinesis and stuff. Do you think that it's something that if we knew how to practice it, we could learn how to do, like that everybody could do?
Anything's possible, but maybe it's a sense that we just don't have anymore.
Yeah. The idea that we've lost it also kind of fits. So we were talking about this earlier, that it kind of fits all these old stories about the confusion of tongues,
and the
right?
fall of man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you have the biblical story basically is the Tower of Babel, but they talk about there's this confusion of tongues, and that's all throughout ancient texts about how before everybody could talk to each other, and then afterwards there was some event, and then after that they couldn't, and all these building projects ceased, and they could no longer communicate with each other.
And doesn't that kind of line up with the whole the Yuga cycle and the Great Year and all that stuff?
It could. I don't know if it does, but it definitely could. It seems to me like reading through those kinds of texts and those stories, because there are spread around. The biblical ones are the ones that most people in the West know the best, but there are plenty of them that aren't biblical. But it seems to be talking about in a sort of a mythological or oral tradition kind of way, some sort of event that happens that affects the whole world. And, it could be anything, like something that changes the electromagnetic energy of the earth somehow. I don't know if the magnetic field was way stronger, like geology does tell us it used to be a lot stronger than it is now. Would we all have telepathy?
Right. Well, but that is the whole Yuga thing, that we were superhuman in the Golden Age, and in the Dark Ages, which we're still in now. This is the lowest level of sense of things that we have.
Right.
And that, the first person I ever interviewed on this stuff, not even on this show, I did it on my music show, was, of course, Lost Star of Myth and Time is the book he wrote, and I know his name, and it has completely escaped me because I needed it. But anyway, he talks about us being in a binary star system.
Yeah.
And that's what actually causes the rotation of the precession of the equinoxes. And he matches a lot of it up to Sirius. And Sirius is moving towards us. The speed at which we're moving is exactly what we need to be rotating in a common point of gravity with Sirius. Sirius takes such a prominent place in so many ancient cultures.
Yep.
in some even being called the second sun. So
Yeah, he's dogging us, man.
but what if, like you have Robert Schoch's research where he's showing that, higher solar activity creates better performance in people who are psychic.
Yeah.
So what would happen if another star that's much bigger came into the local area? What effect is that going to have on us?
That's cool.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what creates that golden age where we have, quote, superpowers.
Right.
Yeah, and going back to the sort of the biblical narrative of the Tower of Babel, this was after the flood, supposedly, or I guess some scholars think it was around 600 years after the flood. These people came out of the mountains and settled in the valley. And then they're the culture that ended up working together to build the tower.
Yeah.
And then there was the confusion of tongue, and the tower fell, and nobody could communicate, and they scattered throughout the earth, and that's kind of the state we're in now. We're all scattered around, and we don't speak the same language.
Yeah.
But it could be tied to precession if you think of it in terms of the end of the last ice age being the time of the flood, the cataclysm that destroyed the previous civilization. And so the remnants of that civilization that perhaps they still, like if we're coming out of the golden age, they still had some of the capability to rebuild, but eventually they lost it and then got scattered, right? We started using language, spoken language, and everything changed.
Yeah, and that's why in so many of these ancient sites, all the most complicated, most impressive work is at the very bottom of the layers, right?
Yeah.
It's the oldest stuff, is the hardest stuff to explain. Has the biggest blocks, has the finest work. This is all throughout Peru. It's like this.
Yeah, yeah.
And in some places in Egypt, I mean, the Assyrian in Egypt is 50 feet below ground level now.
Yes,
the temple of Seti is. It looks like they were digging the foundations to make that temple, and they found this thing. And they ended up they had to turn the temple of Seti. They had to give it this weird right angled turn in order to dodge the Assyrian, which was right there in the way of their plan. Most of those quote unquote mortuary temples are all straight. It's a big long rectangle. But if you look at the plan of the temple of Seti, it actually has this dog leg. So it's an L shape, right? And that L shape is because the Assyrian's right there. So it's like they went out there and they're like, this is where we're going to build it. And they ran into this thing under the ground when they were digging out for the foundations.
Yeah.
So that fascinated me. When I was first looking into this, I was like, man, how old is the Temple of Seti? How old did they think it was? This is 2000 BC or whatever. It's probably, I don't know the exact date, but that they found this thing that was ancient to them.
Yeah.
Was a fascinating idea.
And by the way, that was Walter Cruttendon who wrote The Lost Star of Myth and Time.
Ah, okay.
And I did do an actual interview with him on Where'd the Road Go. I almost feel like the one I did in The Last Exit was better, but the sound quality is nowhere near as good. Because the first time you talk to somebody, you get all the really good questions out of the way. The second time you're going, what didn't we talk about?
Right.
But he's really the one who gave me the confidence to do this show too. He agreed to come on. Like that was sort of my test run. I'm like, okay, let's see if I can do a long-term interview here and not be an idiot. Like not realize, actually know what I'm talking about. And we got done. He's like, no, that was great. He's like, you should totally do this show.
Nice. Well, yeah, I mean, I have to say that it was listening to your show that gave us the confidence. I was like, we can do this. I listened to your show for years, and it was a big inspiration for us to start ours.
Well, you were right. You can do this, and you're really good at it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, man.
Well, so are you, man. Your show has been in my podcast app since I started listening to podcasts, basically.
Nice.
So, yeah.
How did you find Where Did the Road Go?
Man, it's been
Russ
so long.
showed it to me.
Yeah, I showed it to Kyle. Man, that's a good question. The very first podcast I ever listened to was Mysterious Universe, so it's possible that I found it through them.
Okay.
I don't know. I do know that I after a while I was like, let's look for other stuff, and that may be how I found it.
And that's kind of what I did. I started with just listening to Graham Hancock on Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
Moved on to what else is Graham Hancock on? Wait, who else is on these shows? And then just kept branching out.
There you go. Yeah. That's a good way to find podcasts. But I don't think I found yours that way. I think maybe I did. Maybe it was Red Pill.
Oh, that could be.
It could have been him, because I used to read his. He used to write a lot, and I would read what he posted, and maybe he talked about it in there. I don't know.
He did.
I can't remember.
He did,
it was
actually.
years ago.
Yep.
Yeah.
He was very supportive early on before I ever even talked to him.
Yeah.
So we were talking about Mars and the anomalies, and we haven't brought up Richard Hoagland.
That's true. Most of my experience with Richard Hoagland is from Coast to Coast.
Yeah. So, like, early on, I was very interested in what Richard Hoagland had to say, but it seems like after a certain point to him, everything was artificial out in space.
Right.
You know, it's like, doesn't matter what it is. No, it's artificial. And it's like, okay, you were kind of interesting at first, but now I think you're just throwing everything out there, you know. You got one of these has to be artificial.
Right.
But
was he the one that was talking about huge, almost invisible glass things on the moon? Was that him too? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's when he lost me.
So when the face on Mars, the one that looks like a plateau, when that came out, he asked NASA for the raw image and they would not give it to him.
Yeah.
And he said that the image they were putting out had been put through so many filters that he put a human face through those same filters and you couldn't even tell it was a face anymore.
Mm-hmm.
He also said that the sun was at such a low angle when they took this picture that it wipes out any detail on the top.
Now, this is interesting too, because when you look at that first image, like on Wikipedia and other places, it gives the date that the image was taken. Mm-hmm. Now they have another image that's in contrast, but they don't give you the date. And that's what I was trying to compare, is like, okay, if one image was taken near the summer solstice and this other image, this later image that they're saying, see, it's just a trick of the light. When was that image taken? I wanted to know, but I could not find the date of that image. They gave the year, but not the day of the month.
And there are interesting alignments with the structures around it. Whether it all be by chance. I mean, it does happen by chance once in a while, but it seems almost planned out.
Right. Now that would be a fun thing to do, is to get if you could get on like a stellarium type program and set yourself on Mars and look out and see what the sky is doing, because that's kind of where I was going with this.
Yeah.
Like, does Mars have precession of the equinoxes?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It's like it
precesses.
It's I can't remember. It was like 160,000 years as opposed to ours, which is around 26,000 years. So there are interesting, and it has Milankovitch cycles and I think they're much more pronounced. Its orbit is a lot different than ours. Much more oblique, and
it gets pulled around a lot more by Jupiter. Yeah.
The what was I going to say about the face? But he had actually put up quite a few posts showing, like if you look at it, you can see an eyeball in the eye socket and stuff like that. And it's kind of like where he went after that is kind of like, oh man, does this discount the stuff you did before?
Right.
Or were you on a more level ground when you did the stuff prior? Because I was really fascinated with his stuff. I don't know if his website still exists, but it was like enterprisemission.com or something. And he would always have fascinating stuff up there. But then he got very into NASA being a whole conspiracy and stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Did Graham write a book with him, or was that with somebody else? He wrote a Mars book.
He did write a Mars book. And most of the Mars book is about the danger asteroids pose to us. But hang on. I have that.
This is my favorite part of these shows.
The Mars mystery. Yeah, it's just him.
Oh, okay, it's just Graham.
Yeah.
That's the one Graham Hancock nonfiction that I haven't read yet, so I need to dive into that one. I really do.
This is the one Graham Hancock book I bought twice. Because I had bought a bunch of them, and then this got knocked behind my bookcase. And so I was like, oh, which Graham Hancock's book do I want? Oh, I don't have the Mars Mystery, so I bought it again. And then I found it behind the bookcase and went, so someone's getting a gift.
Yeah. Me? Send it to me, guy.
It's too late. It's gone. But yeah, I mean, like half the book deals with Mars and some of the oddness there and the alignments of the structures. And then the rest deals with the fact that we have this, potential of asteroids and comets hitting us and no way to prepare for it.
Yeah.
Well, one other thing I wanted to say in reference to the face on Mars, like I was pointing out that it's 1.2 miles across or whatever, and this is huge. But if it is a natural feature, in other words, the mesa itself is natural, but it was modified, that is totally doable based on what we see here, because the terracing that's done in South America and some of these just massive earthworks that have been done here in ancient times.
I mean, how big's the Giza Plateau? The whole thing was flattened and paved, and
yeah.
So it's. I'm just trying to go on the side of it's still possible that this thing was. I don't think the whole mesa was made.
Yeah,
right.
I definitely doubt that, but that it could have been modified to look like a face from space on the solstice. Yeah, that would be totally within what we see here.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Like the Nazca lines and stuff like that. You can't see that from the ground, and obviously those aren't
giant
dependent. They aren't dependent on the time of year either. But still, there are some things like that. So,
but what we have no idea what kind of culture would have been there, what kind of tech they would have had. So, I mean, maybe they did have the technology to just build up a mesa like that.
Maybe so.
Right.
And this kind of leads into another aspect of the Mars question. I think we talked about this last time. If it was maybe just a place they stopped. It was maybe it didn't have life on it, and it was just like a way station.
Right.
Would they build some massive earthwork there to market? That seems like might have been doable, or it might be something that
an advanced civilization would do.
Yeah.
If you could. And I mean, there are weird stories about this. Of course, we went into Sitchin last time too. Sitchin talks about the Watchers being on Mars. I mean, those are all interesting ideas. But I don't know. Like, could there have been an advanced civilization that evolved there, or do we think that it's more likely that if there was somebody there that built the advanced stuff, that they came there from somewhere else? And then if you're asking that question, then the next question is like, well, where's the most likely place that they came from? Well, it's here, which makes another interesting question. So somebody very advanced in the past from here went to Mars and built stuff there. That's also a fascinating idea.
And when you think about it, if our culture ended today, in 10,000 years, there'd be nothing left.
Right.
So what if there were cultures from 100,000 years ago that were spacefaring? We would have no evidence of it.
Right. There would be very, very little evidence. I mean, like the one thing that we've talked about this a lot on our show, like what would be left of our civilization? Well, I mean, the buildings, no. Most of the buildings would be gone. People say, the Hoover Dam. Well, the Hoover Dam is in a canyon that's full of water. So if there's any kind of cataclysm, it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, I think as far as constructs go, that because they did that series on like National Geographic or whatever, that was like the world without humans or something like that.
After man or something like that.
Yeah, and they said basically the two structures that would last the longest would be the Hoover Dam and the Great Pyramids.
Right.
Which is just, who knows how long those have already been there, and they would still outlast us.
Right. Yeah. And that's, again, assuming that there's no cataclysmic end. Because the Hoover Dam is not going to survive any kind. If there's any kind of increased water flow through that canyon, the Hoover Dam's gone. Yeah. Right.
But you still might have some of it there.
Well,
though.
the water flow that took out the Colorado Plateau. I mean, just completely took
most of the plateau and
just ripped it away. It's gone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that, any type of water flow like that would just be gone.
It's possible that if it wasn't too bad, that some of the dam might be left, or there's be some evidence left in the mountains there.
Yeah, but I think our underground structures would be the most. That would be what would be found in 12,000 years. So some of these massive underground structures that we've built.
Right, like NORAD, Cheyenne Mountain.
Right. Like they showed. I think they showed on that show, like New York City, and it's all jungle and stuff. It's just like. But if you dug down, I mean, there's floors and floors and floors and floors down under New York City that. Some of those sewer systems, some of those subway systems might still be there if there wasn't a big earthquake and all that kind of stuff.
They'd be full of water.
They might be full of water.
But a lot of that stuff would also, anything made out of metal is eventually going to rust and decay.
Yeah.
It's anything made out of stone that's going to last.
Right. So, like, Stone Mountain has a big carving on it. And then, of course, the Mount Rushmore. Now, those aren't structures. But those would last a long time,
and they would deteriorate. So you would be one of those. It would be one of those things like 15,000 years from now, someone would be looking at it, going, "I don't know. I can kind of see faces there," and everyone else is going
crazy.
Yeah, it's just that pareidolia stuff.
Exactly right. But they would last long enough for people to make legends about them.
Right.
In they would still be there in, say, I don't know, 5-10 generations.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And so people would, and of course the people that lived around them, they would be telling each other stories about these enormous faces on these mountains, and the names would shift and change over time. And
Stone Mountain is granite, so that carving will last a lot longer than the Mount Rushmore carvings and stuff. I think those are.
I don't know. I know Stone Mountain's granite. I don't know what Mount Rushmore is.
I think it's sedimentary, but I could be wrong.
And we do have, as Michael Cremo has shown, very old Homo sapien skeletons and things like that get kind of brushed under the rug because they don't fit the paradigm.
Right.
That's right.
So we do find the occasional thing here and there that just doesn't fit, the out of place objects or artifacts and stuff like that.
Yeah, and those always make me want, because Cremo takes the position that these things are showing that humans have been around for millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of years.
Right.
And I think that, that's a possibility, but let's just say we take all that evidence at face value, which is, what we do when we read the book. I think that it also points to the idea that maybe the whole way that we date geological layering is wrong. It could be saying that, like Cremo says, that humans have been on Earth for 100 million years, but it also could be saying that layer isn't that old. So
right. Yeah, that's another good possibility.
Yeah. And I think
either one would drastically change the paradigm.
Right.
Yes. And I feel like Cremo's kind of using the scientific narrative against them with that, because he's like, okay, I'm going to use your science on how we date this stuff, and that makes this that old, and they're going, no, that one doesn't count. And it's like,
right. Yeah, that one doesn't count. I don't remember the specifics, but one of my favorite examples of that was the skeleton that was found in one of the mines that's under the mountain. Yeah. Right. The mountain has moved on top of that skeleton since that skeleton was put there. And that puts it like, I don't know, he said something at 250 million years old.
Mm-hmm.
That's very old. And
when you think about it, most of our scientific dating and stuff, like even the age of the Earth, the age of the solar system, this is all based basically on guesses that we've extrapolated from.
Yeah, and the vast majority of that kind of stuff comes from looking at strata from a uniformitarian view, right?
Yes, yeah.
Is it getting in your computer?
What was that?
We heard the cat.
Yeah, the cat. The cat is a talker. The cat is now locked out of the room.
All right. Well, I think he made a good point.
Treats are always a good point.
Yeah, but the uniformitarian view is how they look at this strata. And so I've had this question, and I've been wanting to ask So if any of the listeners out there know about this, it would be cool to maybe see in the comments or something, or get a hold of us. You guys can write us emails about, so what happened with the uniformitarian view where we look at all these layers, all this strata, and each one, it represents, so many hundreds of thousands or millions of years of deposition. But that whole mindset was set up before the acceptance of the KT event, the one that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So so now that they know, now that it's well accepted that there was this enormous impact that happened that changed the climate all over the globe and wiped out a ton of species and caused one of the great mass extinction events. And it happened very quickly, like in the space of a day. The main. I mean, I'm sure that the after effects lasted for who knows, decades, possibly centuries.
Well, also some of the large dinosaurs survived for a while afterwards. It didn't wipe them all out in an instant.
Right, but it did cause massive movements of stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. So did they go back and say, okay, actually all these layers were made almost instantly, and then change the date? Is it still 65 million years ago is my question. Because all the layers on top of that, you have the KT event, and you got what they call the KT boundary. It's the KP boundary, I guess now. But that boundary layer, everything above it, at least the layers that are directly above it, must have been laid down catastrophically and very quickly. Whereas all the way up until that point, so the dating of it at 65 million years is counting down from the top, right? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So once you get to that point, you realize actually this event here was enormously catastrophic. It caused massive tidal waves to go all over the planet and deposit enormous amounts of sediment in seconds or minutes, hours. Did they change the dating based on the strata?
And whatever happened at the end of the last ice age also had that effect.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe not as great as that one, but it was still an enormous amount of material was moved all over the place very quickly.
Yeah. See, I think that the situation with the end of the last ice age is better understood in terms of how fast these layers were laid down, because we have the dendrochronology backing up the carbon-14 dating.
Right.
So we can, we have a pretty solid timeline going back with the tree rings. And then, of course, the ice cores. So they can't say, well, it took thousands and thousands and thousands of years for these layers above that, that strata line where the beginning of the Younger Dryas started, or whatever, the black mat.
The Younger Dryas boundary, yeah.
So with the KT event, we don't have that. We don't have
the ice cores, the dendrochronology, or the carbon-14 because it's too old.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay.
But it's still, I think it's a good question. Was the dating of the strata post that's above the KT boundary, was it drastically changed? Or did they say, okay, at least these layers right above it must have been catastrophically deposited in a matter of days or years instead of millions or hundreds of thousands of years?
And every once in a while you get someone with a theory that humans and dinosaurs coexisted.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah. I don't think it would have been awesome for the humans.
Well, it's cool
depending on the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, going back to Cremo's work, like if either way, if these skeletons that were found in these layers that are supposed to be millions and millions of years old, and the layer dating is correct, then
the humans and the dinosaurs were together. Yeah.
Or the layer, dating the layers is wrong because of the fact that we have cataclysms that come and totally drastically change everything and deposit tons of sediment in a very short amount of time. Then the dating is wrong, and the dinosaurs are much closer to us in the past than
that's a great point.
Say.
That's a great point.
And of course, anytime you look deeper into time, it's harder and harder to figure out how accurate we are.
Right.
We're going from little tiny pieces of information and then building out, extrapolating from that, but we have no way to double check that information.
Right. And that's the thing about uniformitarianism is it's basically gives you a baseline, with the baseline being like, no, you can't extrapolate processes that we don't see in modern times. Yeah. And that's what gives them the baseline to say, okay, so using modern processes, this is about how long it would have taken to deposit all this material for this layer. And that's an interesting way to do it, but it's kind of, I don't know. I think that it's short-sighted. Catastrophic stuff happens. And one of the most fundamental principles of geology, I think, is scale and variance, about, how stuff looks the same whether it's small or large. So that's why you have to have something in the picture for scale. Otherwise, you're looking at a photograph, you can't tell how big or small a feature is in geology. Exactly. Right? It could be like erosion especially does this. So you're looking at erosive features in sand or something, and if you don't have a scale in there, you can't tell how large the feature is. So I think that scale and variance works in terms of cataclysms too. Like, uniformitarian geology accepts local or regional catastrophic events like regional floods, right?
Yeah.
So scale and variance would imply that global ones could happen, I think.
I agree. I'm just coughing and can't talk.
Man.
Yeah, it's one of those coughs that has irritated my throat. Now it keeps wanting to cough.
Yeah. You want to take a break? We'll come back. No?
Nah, you're doing most of the talking.
Okay.
You're doing most of the coughing.
That is true. I actually watched a couple episodes of Ancient Aliens this week. I have like 50 of them on my DVR. I just never watched them.
Yeah.
But one of the ones I watched was actually talking about whether or not there could be very ancient civilizations that have just completely been wiped off the earth.
Yeah.
And they had an author on, Michael Carlotto. Have you heard of this guy?
Doesn't sound familiar.
He's a PhD. I don't know in what, but he wrote a book called Before Atlantis. And it is similar to, I think, what we were talking about last time, that Rem Flamath had written the book talking about how some of the monuments are pointed to old North Poles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's exactly what he's looking at as well. He's saying, we have these structures that are aligned to these poles, but then as you start looking at some of the other structures, they're actually aligned to where the former poles were. Which suggests that at least the initial laying of those structures is much, much older.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. That's very interesting.
Because we orient everything toward the pole. Well, we don't, but the ancient cultures orient everything toward the North Pole.
Right. They were oriented towards the cardinal direction, so you can tell where the North Pole was for them. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. And does he talk about where he thinks the older pole was? I know I've seen people talk about Hudson Bay.
Well, Hudson Bay was definitely the previous one. I mean, if nothing else, the magnetic North Pole was there, because we can track that to some degree.
Yeah.
There's one, oh man, I know there was one in the Yukon at one point.
Okay.
And I don't remember where the other one was.
Well, so the interesting thing about the Hudson Bay one is that the massive ice sheet from the previous ice age, not just the Younger Dryas, but also the ice age that was before that, was centered on Hudson Bay. Yes. Which is weird. That's weird.
Uh-huh. Because that's where you get the whole pole shift idea.
Right. Yeah. But that puts a pole shift at a very recent time,
Yes.
Geologically speaking, yeah.
It could have happened at the end of the ice age. I mean, whatever happened to the planet might have also shifted the pole.
Right. And it's also interesting that if it can be a slow process, it would be fast geologically speaking, but let's say that the pole could actually wander to a different place and not do it quickly. So let's say it takes thousands of years, right? Something happens and then the planet is sort of knocked askew, and then the pole sort of shifts over the next couple of thousand years into a new position, and everything kind of comes into. That would explain, because there's the last glacial maximum was like 22 to 26,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that was the point where the ice had gone the furthest south that it had been in that period, and then it slowly started to melt back, all the way up until the Younger Dryas, which was a sudden, it had melted back very quickly. It melted back pretty far, and then the Younger Dryas starts, and all of a sudden the ice returns.
Right.
So that could, you could have a shift of the pole there. The ice was melting because Hudson Bay had moved south.
Yeah. Okay.
I can only imagine
it would have moved. It would have moved north, though, wouldn't it?
Well, it would have been the North Pole, and then after the pole shift, it would have been moved south, right?
I guess everything from the North Pole is south. Huh?
That's right. So if it was the North Pole, it had to move south if it moved.
There's an Infocom game. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Infocom games. But for anyone who's not, they were text adventures back in the 80s, and they were incredibly clever. The most famous one is Zork.
Zork, great.
But they had a slightly more adult-oriented one called Leather Goddesses of Phobos. And it was utterly ridiculous, but part of what you do is you go to Mars, and at some point you get to, like, the North or South Pole of Mars, and it'll say, you can go, like, you're on the North Pole, and it's going, you can go south, south, or south.
Right. Where
and
did
you're
they
like,
get the leather?
Good question. I don't really remember that much about the game, but I remember that part of being on the pole and it telling you can go south, and it's like, yeah, I guess that's the only way you can go.
All right. Well, I retract all of the bad stuff I said about you not being a gamer, because you just totally redeemed yourself.
Infocom games are the best.
Yeah, I loved Zork.
Yeah. So what were we just talking about?
Well, I was going to say, moving. Yeah, I was going to say that. You guys are saying a pole shift. That the only way I can imagine this happening, and maybe this is what y'all are talking about, is crustal shift.
Right.
Like, in other words, the planet's still rotating as it was before, but for some reason, maybe there was
the crust becomes decoupled from
the crust. There's maybe centrifugal forces that pull the crust, these northern and southern pole areas down closer to the equator. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, or if it's a changing of the plasticity of the asthenosphere or something that, right?
That causes the whole thing to shift like the skin.
Right, the shift like the skin, yeah. Because you're right, like an actual pole shift of the entire planet requires
a lot of
something
weird,
else. Yeah. There's a whole lot of material all moving in the same directions, and you have to change all of those directions to do that, and that's very hard to do. So,
well, if another planet were to hit us, like Venus,
right,
or at least come close enough and have a thunderbolt exchange, and then it could shift it would not only melt the ice instantly because you'd have those electrical thunderbolts, but it could actually shift the planet on its axis.
Right. So I agree. The only thing that could cause that kind of shift would be massive
energy input the size of the planet.
Right. Massive external forces is what you're talking about. Yeah.
And one of the things, and Robert Schoch points this, Robert Schoch doesn't go with the Venus hypothesis. Robert Schoch thinks we were hit by massive solar flares.
Right.
But what's pointed out in some of the electric universe work, and Schoch points it out, is that you have these glyphs all over the ancient world that are plasma discharges.
Right.
Like, that's what they are. There's no doubt. And there's something like 30 different types. And then there's 5 others that if you saw them in real life, you would be dead.
And those aren't.
And those aren't representative, but the other 30 are, which suggests really was some kind of plasma outburst that people all over the world saw. Whether it had been Venus getting too close and these giant thunderbolts unleashing, or whether it be the sun hitting us with such a large flare, or even something cosmic that we just don't know anything about that hit us.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's very compelling work. I completely agree. But I do think that we could find one of the deadly ones, maybe somewhere carved, and it's just like the glyph of because he must have died while carving it, right?
It's entirely possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of the whatever the shaman figures and all that kind of stuff being
auroras. The Z pinch.
Yeah.
I agree.
And and something so spectacular that they're going to record that.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you saw those enormous forms in the sky, what would you think?
And for so long, people are like, well, this is a man with 2 dots on either side, and we think it represents this. And then, plasma scientists looked at it and went, oh, no, that's a plasma discharge.
Yeah, that's the Z-pinch guy. Yeah, exactly.
Like, that is exactly what it looks like.
Right. Yep. I think that is fascinating. So, what, have they, I don't know this, have they shown that they would take those definite forms in the sky if there was enough energy? Because I know the auroras now are mostly bands, they're sort of wavy bands of light. So have they shown that if there was enough of an energy output that they would take those?
I don't know.
What would you call it? Like more
formations?
Formations, yeah. Like would we see them in the sky?
I believe so, but I mean we haven't, so we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Let's hope we don't, because that would not be good for us.
No, it wouldn't be good. But if it did happen before, it will happen again, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, if it's a solar outburst, we are going to be hit by a massive solar flare at some point.
Yeah.
Just like the asteroid thing, just like the pandemic thing that we're dealing with now, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Everything is cyclical. Everything is cyclical. So
except if it was Venus, that might have been sort of a outlier event that doesn't exactly happen all the time.
That's you're right. You're right. So, but that would be cyclical in galactic terms, because it would be caused by some object from the galaxy coming through the solar system, right?
Well, I mean, there's a few different theories. I mean, I think Velikovsky went with the idea that Venus was part of Jupiter, and something large hit Jupiter from the other side and expelled Venus from it.
Right, and that would be the galactic part. It was some object from outside the solar system that hit Jupiter and then caused it to expel Venus, which he thought was the core or part of the core of Jupiter.
Part of the core, and and that's what left that big red spot, the storm that is never ending, because that's where Venus came out. And he bases that partly on mythology. When Laird Scranton did his book, he found that Venus and Jupiter actually share a lot of the same gas formations, and nobody knows why.
Right. And Jupiter has a much less dense core than they expected, and no one knows why. Right. Whereas Saturn has an incredibly dense core, and so you'd think that Jupiter would have an even more dense core than Saturn because it's bigger, but it doesn't. It's lost. Yeah. It seems to have lost a lot of its core. So yeah, I agree. All that's very interesting stuff.
And then you have the sort of deeper electric universe idea that the solar system was a very different place prior to 12,000 BC, where Saturn was actually our sun.
Yeah.
And that's one that took me a while to even consider. Like I still haven't looked at all the mythological references that David I can't remember his name because I don't remember. Yes, David Talbot put together. But I mean, the idea was we were in a orbit around Saturn with...
Saturn was the sun, right?
Saturn was the sun, and I think we were with Mars, and then we came into this solar system, and Venus got ejected from Saturn at some point as like energies exchanged and stuff.
Yeah.
It sees not probable, but...
And pretty complicated. It's very complicated.
It's a fascinating thing to think about, that history could be that different potentially, and we don't know. That we were literally around a different sun at a different point in history.
Right.
But I have a hard time giving it too much credence without more solid evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I like the idea of these massive, galactic or intergalactic filaments that like there's like these nodal points in the filaments, and that's what ignites the star and is causing that burning to happen. And then if for whatever reason these huge forces out that are multiple galaxies in size shift for some reason, then it just puts out that star and it goes back to being this little thing, and it when the trail runs past another one, boom, it lights up. I think that's just that's really cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, when I first started looking into this, the electric universe thing, I really like physics. I like to follow all these, materialists, reductionist physicists and stuff, and listen to what they say and find out what the newest stuff is. And when I found this, I was like, yeah, I want to check it out. And I'm trying to think. I definitely looked into Halton Arp and the strange galaxies and
redshift problem,
Wall Thornhill.
Yeah,
and the only problem that I have with Wall Thornhill, I think, is everything that he says is very interesting and compelling. But I really wanted to hear him get into the nuts and bolts of like how this stuff works. But he instead will say things like, well, it just, this is electricity does this. And then somebody charted out the, something about the electron, and it just, it explains all of this, but it doesn't really go into the nuts and bolts of it to tell me how, how do all these things work. I want to understand it from, he's a physicist. Break it down like Feynman did with, when he would go into detail on magnetism or some of these really strange forces that nobody understands, and he would give you all of these sort of nuts and bolts of how it interacts, how it works, and that's really what I would like to learn more about in this with the electric universe hypothesis. I think it's cool.
Yeah, well, it does, and it has a lot of scientific backing as long as you're willing to look outside the accepted view of things. I mean, the idea of the sun as an electrical sun rather than a controlled thermonuclear explosion not only works better, but it explains all the weird stuff about the sun that the thermonuclear model can't.
Yeah, and I kind of think that it's sort of both.
It very well may be.
It seems to me like that the sun is incredibly electrical, but it's also a thermonuclear explosion. Because both of those things, when you get to that level of energy, it's all in the EM band, right? It's all doing electromagnetic stuff. What the root, I guess what the electric universe is saying is, what is the root cause of a star?
Yeah, and in the standard model, the root cause is gravity.
Gravity, yeah.
And in electric universe, they're like, well, gravity is a phenomenon of electricity.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that Wall would point out is that, electricity has both the repelling and attracting forces.
Yes.
And so it can account for gravity and also have this, repulsion on the other side. Like it has
it's got a polarity.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Polarity. Mm-hmm. I want to understand that more. Yeah. I want to understand, because he would say things like, well, also, what was the other thing? Like gravity can travel at ridiculous speeds, beyond the.
Yeah.
I want to understand more of that. In what medium? What are we talking about here? How does it work?
Well, I don't think they totally know, but they're seeing the effects of it is kind of how it goes.
Yeah. And it is, I think.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
When I had Wall on, we were talking about the binary star hypothesis, and he didn't support it at all. He's like, I don't think we're in a binary system. And I said, okay, but if we were in a binary system, could the electric universe theory explain how we could be in a sharing a gravitational point with something as far away as Sirius? And he kind of paused and he went, well, yeah, actually it could.
Well,
that's one of the big arguments is how could we be in a binary system with something that far away?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, that's pretty big for a binary system, but there are star clusters that are huge. But of course, the star cluster itself has a common center of gravity, so that's what they're looking at. But it might be a stretch with regular gravity, with the idea of regular gravity that two stars that far away could be orbiting each other or orbiting a common center. But maybe we're in a cluster.
That also, I think that's what Laird Scranton has suggested, that we're in a cluster rather than just a binary system.
Yeah.
We do. There's a group called the Sirius Foundation, I think. And the last time Sirius B moved between Sirius A and us, they turned every instrument they had on it. And one of the things they noticed is that the spin of the Earth slowed while that happened. And that's not, what are the chances that's going to happen? right when Sirius B moves in front of Sirius A, the spin of the Earth slows for a moment, which suggests some kind of connection.
Coincidence takes planning.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of evidence that we're connected somehow to Sirius. And, of course, when you look at, like, the Dogon saying, well, our ancestors come from Sirius, I almost wonder, again, if you look at that Golden Age type of an idea, Laird 2 has shown that these weren't, like, necessarily extraterrestrials. They were something else.
Yeah.
There's something from somewhere else, but maybe when Sirius moves closer and we have those more, intense abilities, we can communicate with something we normally can't.
Yeah.
Right.
That idea is really cool.
That is really cool. That. And all this quote unquote spiritual communications that happen now are attempts of those same beings to try to communicate with us, even though we're kind of out of the golden age, right?
Right.
We don't have the ability anymore.
We're wandering around in the dark, and they're trying to get our attention.
Right. So this is all. I think I've wanted to ask you this. So I don't. Maybe I have before, but you've done a lot of shows on the Yuga cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my questions about it is, if there is a golden age and we're all like people are incredibly advanced and we all know what's going on, why would you let yourself fall back out of it? You see what I'm saying?
I don't think that's something you can stop.
I mean, but if you could leave.
Oh, like leave the planet?
Yeah, get out of the system that's causing it, right?
Maybe they did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also possible that we're so tied to the planet that we can't leave.
Well, that's a sad idea. I don't like that idea.
It is, but it's entirely possible. I mean, when people go out into space, they immediately start having health issues.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't sent someone as far as Mars yet, but I mean, it might be that we're tied to our star somehow.
Yeah.
We know the sun affects us, but if we tried to leave the solar system, who knows what effect that might have on us?
Right. I agree that that it does stuff to people when they go to space. But is it health issues relative to them coming back to Earth? Like, would they be fine if they stayed in space?
Right, yeah. And, what was it with the twins there? That one, was it the, I know it starts with a T.
Yeah,
they
the
got
telomeres.
Longer. Telometers, yeah.
Yeah.
And they got longer when he was in space.
Right, which means you can live longer. Telomeres.
Yeah, we call those space genes.
Space genes. His space genes were activated.
But I thought they said it didn't really make any difference. It's just that it was an effect.
Yeah. I mean, telomeres are the things that supposedly regulate aging. So
right.
I don't see how you can just be like, well, it didn't really have an effect on him.
Well, I guess we'll know if one dies at 65 and the other lives to 100.
Right. Right, or if one continues to look, in his 30s when the other one's looking in his 50s or whatever.
Right. So then the next market will be sending people to space so they can look younger.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't that be crazy if just going to space for a while would actually be a sort of a fountain of youth?
But we've also had people in the International Space Station for long periods of time, and there doesn't seem to be any health benefit to it.
Well, health benefit relative to coming back to Earth is what I mean. Yeah. But it may take decades for it to manifest.
Maybe.
I mean, who knows? I mean, we don't know enough about the human genome yet to know that guy. It was more than just telomeres got changed. They said that all kinds of stuff was happening in his genes that they didn't understand.
Really? I didn't know
whole
that.
sections of his genetics were being quote unquote activated, is what they said that are normally not. So it was like, and that may just be, I don't know enough about genetics to say what's going on, but it sounded to me like his body was responding to being in this vastly different environment because he was there for so long, right? So
and I think that's what the end result was, is they were saying it was just a response to, it was a normal change to the environment.
Yeah, normal. Space is not normal. That's what I'm saying, is like the longer people stay up there, the more interesting it will get, because we'll know more and more. Now, this was a twin experiment, and they were specifically watching to see. So now they know what to look for. So people who stay up in space for long periods of time, they can come back down and be like, well, man, your space genes got turned on. And what does that even mean? It's an interesting idea like this. We're going back to maybe us coming from Mars or whatever. Like, why do we even have space genes that get turned on?
Yeah.
Now,
And
it could be because just being in a vastly different environment activates genes, and that's how genetics works.
And that would kind of make sense in terms of like the development of life on this planet.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's say we actually do go and colonize some other planet. It may be the same situation for being on another planet as it is for being in space, but it may look like, let's say we go and we colonize some planet, and very rapidly after being on that planet, through the generations, our genes start changing, and we go through this sort of quote unquote evolution.
Yeah.
That changes us to match that environment a little better. It makes us adapt to that environment.
Yeah.
We can't really run that experiment here because we're all already adapted to this one.
Yeah.
Seriah, you're a reader of sci-fi, right? Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah. Do you read any Niven? Do you read Larry Niven?
No. Okay. I have some books from him. I haven't read them.
Yeah, he's most famous for the Ringworld series.
Yeah.
But he had this fascinating idea in his, a lot of these old authors, they did what they call a future history, where they basically start telling the future, but you can read them in consecutive order, even though there are a bunch of different stories about different people. There's all sort of set in the same universe, right?
Oh, okay.
So, so he had this idea that at some point humans would decide, well, we're advanced enough we're interested in colonizing other planets of other star systems. So the first thing they do is they send out a bunch of probes to these nearby star systems that they think have the possibility of having exoplanets, and the probes are programmed to find a planet that's habitable, right? So the probes go out to all these different places, and some of them send signals back, yes, there's a planet here in this system that's habitable. So the human race builds all these enormous, the one-way generational ships where everybody's get put into cryo sleep, and they send the ships off, and this is a one-way trip. And so thousands of people get into the ship, they get put into sleep, and then the ship goes off, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of years to arrive at the star system, and everybody wakes up, and now you have to colonize this planet. And it isn't until after they start arriving at these places that they figure out that there was like an error in the code of the probes. The probe was just programmed to find a habitable point, right? It didn't. So in other words, if it found a planet where there was one spot that was habitable to humans, it would say, "Yep, come here."
Oh man.
So and of course, all these people went on these one-way trips, right? So you can't go back. So they have to colonize them. So they end up colonizing all these crazy planets that have one area where you can, like, one of them is a moon of a Jovian planet, and the moon is so close to the planet that it's pulled into an egg shape. Okay, and at the poles, it's the poles actually stick out of the atmosphere, and because it's pulled into this egg shape, so the poles stick out of the atmosphere. The equatorial band is crazy storms and clouds all the time, and the only place you can live is in between those two. Right.
Interesting.
And there's another place where the planet is got a very dense atmosphere, but there's one gigantic, enormous mountain that sticks out up into the habitable area of the atmosphere, and that's where everybody has to live, on that mountain. Right? Okay. So what ends up later on, and I'm going through this whole long thing because of what Kyle was talking about, is that everybody sort of adapts to that. So you end up with these people that you can tell which one of these colonies they're from because of what they look like, because of the area.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So the people that landed on that moon that has, that moon that I was talking about that's egg-shaped, it has 3 times the gravity of Earth. So all those guys are like dwarves. They're short and very wide, because when you're born there, you want to be 3 feet tall and 4 feet wide because the gravity is 3 times Earth, right? And then there are people that are born on planets that have much less gravity, and they're very tall and thin, but they're all human. So very interesting science fiction stories.
Dan Simmons' Hyperion series is kind of like that, where he has small, stocky, strong people coming from a planet that has heavier gravity.
Yes, exactly.
The other show that does that really well is The Expanse, because they have people who are born in space, and these people can't come back to Earth.
Right.
Yeah. I just started watching that, actually, like 4 or 5 episodes.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
It's really good, and it's more, I think, accurate to what actual space travel would be like than anything I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's true, that in a lot of those old science fiction stories I used to read, the people that ended up, they call them the belters or whatever, they worked in the asteroid belt.
Yeah.
They couldn't come to Earth, and they didn't want to. They were like, why would I want to live down in a hole?
Yeah,
that's what they call the planets.
That's what they call them in
Expanse.
in the
belters,
Expanse. They call them the belters.
Yeah.
I wonder what was the author.
That was Niven.
Okay, I wonder if the whole show is made after Niven's
Could be.
stories.
Yeah, the belters and do not want to live down in a hole. That's what they talk about.
Yeah.
And it is, if you think about it as a gravity well, it is a kind of hole.
Yeah.
So
Nope. The Expanse is written by James S.A. Corey.
okay.
He has 3 books of it. I don't know. It's a whole series.
But I mean, let's be honest. If you had like a single ship that had a fusion drive, or so, you can't go light speed or whatever. But if you could jet around the asteroid belt looking for weird metals and stuff, wouldn't you do it? I mean, wouldn't you? I spend the rest of my life doing that. That sounds like a blast, exploring weird potatoes in space.
So there is a podcast called Empty, and unfortunately they don't really update it very often. But there was a very interesting concept to start it off. So these people are launched to another solar system, whatever, and they're put in cryogenic sleep for however many hundreds of years. But they're realizing that before those people get there, they're going to have light speed travel.
Oh, yeah.
So more than likely. So they're sending these people off, and then at the same time, those people are expecting to wake up and have people already at their destination
right.
who got there quicker.
And have built everything already. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of an interesting concept, to be put into that cryogenic sleep and then wake up and be like, oh, you didn't need to do that. Of course, you wouldn't have still been alive by the time that stuff was perfected anyway, but
right.
It's a weird sort of like...
Or you get there and there's no one there. And then you're like, what happened?
So in this series, they wake up and everything is gone. Like the planets and stuff are still there, but there is no sign of life anywhere. Hence the title Empty. Like the universe literally is empty of life.
Oh.
And they're it. They're trying to figure out what happened and if there's anyone else out there.
Wow. Yeah. Yep.
And the machines are all turning against them.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So it's really good, but there's only I think maybe 6 or 7 episodes, and then they just kind of and that's the end of season 1, and it took them forever to get those first 7 episodes out, but they're well done.
Yeah.
So it's worth a listen. It's just don't expect it to be updated anytime soon. So many podcasts just stop, and I don't know if it's they don't get enough behind them or what, but they'll have some interesting story, and then it's just done.
Yeah. I tried diving into some fiction podcasts, and that's why I couldn't do it, because they'd be really fascinating, and then they would just kind of peter out, or they would just stop updating, or it would end at a not ending, and there was no explanation.
There was a good one. They literally released one episode, and it was like a bigger studio doing it, because now studios are realizing, oh, hey, podcasting seems to be popular. We should do that too. So they get, big stars in to do these podcasts. And there was I don't listen to those because I'm kind of like, I don't know. But there was one. Let's see if I can find the name of it here. I have so many because I save all the podcasts in case, someday they disappear. I still have them all.
Right.
I don't remember which one it was, but it was really well done. It almost seemed like it was going in the direction of Event Horizon.
Yeah.
And it was one episode, and I went, okay, I'm totally into this. Let's go. When's the next episode? And this was last October, and I look at it, it's next episode will be August.
Yeah.
I'm but there was no next episode. They said they had 6 done, and they'd be releasing these 6 episodes, and they've never come out.
Wow.
Maybe they got a movie deal.
I don't know. You go to the website and they're posting stuff like normal, oh, here's the first episode. Hey, look this stuff that's happening, but they're not talking about where the episodes are. And I even tweeted at them. I'm like, where's the rest of your episodes? No response. I'm like, the hell?
Stick with Where Did the Road Go and Brothers of the Serpent, people.
I will tell you, if you want a good science fiction podcast, listen to Wolf 359.
Okay, I'll check that one out.
It is complete. It is a story from beginning to end. They ended it. It has a view of alien life like nothing I've seen before. And it starts off kind of silly, and as it gets going, it gets more and more dark. Like they kind of get their balance between some comedy stuff and dark stuff at the same time.
Yeah.
So like you got to go through the first few episodes, which are, like when I first started listening to them, I'm like, I don't know, this is almost too silly. And then after like the fourth or fifth episode, I'm like, okay, now it's getting good.
That seems to be a thing. Like, they kind of are goofy at the beginning because they're not sure,
Yeah.
But then as they go, they're like, no, this is good, and we can still have comedy in here, but let's get serious.
Yeah, and Empty had 6 episodes. I just pulled that envelope open.
Cool.
But like I said, it's a great concept. Some of these things have fantastic concepts.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea with Wolf 359 is you have this space station. I don't want to give too much away, so it basically starts with them picking up this signal that's classical music. And they're thinking it's coming from Earth because they're way out there orbiting the star Wolf 359. And they're like, oh, it's an old signal from Earth. But then at some point they realize it's not coming from Earth. It's coming from a different direction entirely.
Mm.
And they're going, wait, is someone feeding this back to us?
Yeah.
And that's where the whole thing kind of starts.
I love that kind of stuff. How much time we got here? Because I have another that reminds me of a subject I was going to ask you about.
5 or 10 minutes.
Okay.
Life on, searching for life?
Oh, no. I was going to ask him about the long delay echoes, but yeah, we need to talk about that.
We could do part as a Patreon as well.
Have you, okay, so this is about have you looked into long delay echoes at all?
I'm not sure.
The problem of long delay echoes. Okay, so when they were first kind of getting radio going, so we're talking when they were first experimenting with radio, there was this interesting phenomenon, and it still happens. People keep track of it, but there's this interesting phenomenon that they called LDEs, or long delay echoes, right? So radio waves are they're a form of light, so they move at light speed. Okay, so if I'm sure some people have used like a CB or whatever, and you'll hear people talk, and you kind of hear like this reverb on their voice, like you're hearing it multiple times, but they're real close to each other, and that can be various atmospheric phenomena, but basically light can circle the planet. A beam of light can circle Earth 7 times in a second. Okay, so if all the conditions are right, and some of these ham radio is designed to bounce off the stratosphere, so it stays on the planet, so it will circle it. So that's why at night sometimes people can talk to people from the other side of the planet. You can, if all the conditions are right, you can pick up people from very, very far away on ham radios. So, like I said, light can circle the planet multiple times, and it's 7 times a second. So sometimes you'll get this, you can, if you hear an echo, and there's a half a second delay between what you initially hear and then the echo you hear. Well, it had to bounce off of something for you to hear that echo. And if it's a half a second delay, it went out for a quarter of a second, hit something, and came back.
Right.
Now, a quarter of a second at light speed is a long way. Light goes 186,000 miles a second, right? So the problem of long delay echoes was, how are people hearing these echoes that sometimes were seconds long? What was it bouncing off of? It had to be going out into deep space to come back. And so there's a whole, and it's never really been solved. I mean, people have tried to explain it as being a function of solar stuff, but there's not really a good explanation for these long delay echoes. And I
have heard of it, and I don't know that much about it.
Yeah.
Other than what you basically said, that we don't know why that happens.
Right. There's a whole, there's a whole long conspiracy that you can go into about the Black Knight satellite and it possibly being, because what reminded me of it is you were saying in this science fiction story, they were like, is somebody bouncing this back at us?
Yeah. So, well, and the Black Knight satellite is one of those things, like the first I came across that was John Keel writing about it. And his basic thing was that it was a satellite we were picking up that was moving, that was kind of looked like it was observing the satellites we were putting up, and it was moving on a polar orbit.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of disappeared. But then you have people, pulling up pictures off the space shuttle going, is this the Black Knight satellite? Yeah. And I'm kind of like, I don't think so. I think whatever that was something different.
Yeah, and whatever it was able to leave orbit, which is weird.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we couldn't do polar orbits at that point, so we know it's not us necessarily.
Right. And it was too big. They calculated its mass at the time, and it was way bigger than anything we or the Russians could have put up there. So
the other thing is, like, when you have the old accounts of people looking at Mars and seeing canals.
Right.
And this was, confirmed over and over again. But if you look at Mars now, you don't see canals.
Right. That is very strange.
It's like, so what happened on the face of Mars that may have looked like canals that has changed?
Yeah. And I mean, what do you think of the, have you looked into I'm sure you have, the whole, what is it, the Russian probe that just went dead right after it saw anomalous stuff right there by Phobos?
Yep. It's approaching Mars, and you see that white streak, and then the streak seems to stop right in front of it, and then it's just gone.
Yeah.
And they and Russia literally said our probe just got shot down by a UFO.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I mean, it's not inaccurate. It was an unidentified flying object.
Right.
It doesn't mean it was manned, but
right.
I think Hoagland suggested it was an ancient security system.
Yeah.
On Phobos, they're saying Phobos has some weird stuff on it too. Phobos has a very large tower.
Yes. Yep.
That you don't see normally in nature.
Right. The obelisk of Phobos.
Yeah. And there's other weird stuff in the solar system, like the Death Star moon.
Yep, that one is very strange. It's, no moon. That's no moon. That's all I have to say about that. You look at that and you're just like, okay, that large of an impact should have destroyed that thing. It's so strange.
And I do believe the EU had an explanation that involved it moving too close to Saturn or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there could have been an impact that big. I just don't know. It seems like it's so enormous. It should have.
But the fact that it looked like the Death Star with the wall running all the way around it instead of a trench, and then that being almost in the same position, it's just like, what are the chances of that?
Yeah. Well, Lucas was telling an old story in a new way.
Are we creating the reality around us before we discover it?
Right. Now, that's a whole other rabbit hole. Like, that gets into that book about the Titanic and all that stuff.
I hope not, because I don't want many worlds to be true. I'm totally biased.
Why? What do you got against it?
I just don't. I think it seems like a cop out, really.
Okay.
We are trying to understand the universe around us. So because there are all these mysteries that don't seem to make sense, we just make up an infinite number of universes that make ours probable.
Yeah. It is a cop out. It's kind of like, the dark matter and dark energy. It's just like a kind of a cop out.
But what if the multi-world theory folds more around consciousness than like randomness?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but that's not what they're talking about. They're observing, the tiniest particles that we've been able to observe, and they're basing something off of probability calculations. And so they're just saying, well, every single of the tiniest building blocks of everything can be both one way or the other, and actually will be both.
Right. And each time
it splits the entire universe of all the other particles into its own. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
To me, it's like I realize that I'm biased, right? I'm fascinated by physics until we get there, and then I'm like, for some reason, that strikes me as that's not beautiful. Like every other aspect of physics and the existence of the universe is.
I agree. It makes it a giant mess. It's just an infinite number of universes where basically everything has to happen because all possibilities are taken.
Right. So the fact that we live in this universe where we see these patterns, such as like phi, the golden ratio exhibited all over the place and in life and in every, like that's just happenstance that it's one of the, infinite number of universes that don't have that pattern.
Nah, it's just because we're in a computer simulation.
Also boring.
Boring.
and also there's only one electron.
Just one.
Just one. It just repeats. It just keeps showing up throughout time. Every electron is the same electron.
It's the same one doing everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't like it, and I realize that I don't like it because of a bias. I mean, it's not. I just don't like it. It's boring to me.
We're out of time, but you guys want to hang out and do a short Patreons thing?
Absolutely.
Sure. Let's end. First of all, where can people find you?
Our podcast is called Brothers of the Serpent and can be found anywhere podcasts can be found. And we also have a website, brothersoftheserpent.com.
And you can email us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
That's right. Send us questions and trolling. We love it.
Where Did the Road Go is made possible in part by our awesome patrons. And for those of you pledging $10 or more, an extra special thanks. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Tim, Stone Wilderness, Luke Osborne, Rob Drummond, Alex Whitcomb, Nadine, Damian Tallman, Edu Camahort, Tactical Therapist, Janet Bunderson, 36 Dingo, Maria, Jennifer Campbell, American Rambler, Kevin, John Rutledge Foster, Eric Citron, Andy McNamara, Sasha Jorg, Matthias Sunby, James Lattimore, Sam Sheeran, Dominic O'Malley, Christopher Vaughn, Riker and Stark, Sean Cosgrove, Jose A., Roger Gonzalez, Craig Cicernos, Ray Benedetto, Linz Jackson K., Alfred Tuttle, Kevin Schreck, Patricia Giaquinta, William Lovelace, Mark Brady, Chris is a hot dog a sandwich, and Carla Mahoney. Thank you all so very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.